Hey guys, in this video I interview someone named Khalifa. Khalifa learned Spanish to a strong B2 level, which is pretty fluent, in just 10 months.
Cada vez que consumí contenido, especialmente cuando me metí en contenidos reales, me metí más, me iba aprendiendo más y más sobre la cultura y la riqueza de estas regiones del mundo. Entonces disfrutaba mucho aprender este idioma y fue el primer idioma que aprendí por mi cuenta. Entonces no solo me hace amar estas regiones del mundo, esta cultura, pero también al aprendizaje de los idiomas en general, ¿no?
In this video, Khalifa talks about how he went about learning Spanish and how he's currently going about learning Swahili. He's a really insightful guy, and I think he shared a lot of really useful advice in this interview. Now, before I jump in, I just want to apologize up front because I actually just finished filming the interview, and because I unfortunately wasn't able to sleep very well last night, I think there's probably some times where I'm going to seem a little bit low energy or maybe just, responding in a kind of awkward way. So I apologize for that, but I think the content's good, and so I really hope you guys enjoy. Thanks so much for coming on. How are you doing today?
I'm good, yeah. How are you?
Pretty good, yeah. So you reached a pretty impressive level in Spanish in a pretty short period of time, and I've heard that now you're working on Swahili. So yeah, I just thought it would be cool if we could dive into your whole language learning journey from start up until the present, and just explore how you got the results you got and where you're headed on from here.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, yeah, it's a pleasure. Cool. So when did you decide that you first wanted to learn Spanish, and what were your motivations? Spanish was the first language that you ever tried to learn on your own, right?
Yeah, so yeah, it's the first language that definitely. So it was like last summer, it was like at the beginning of August last year, where like before that I was like, okay, I know Arabic and I know English, like I don't need to learn another language, like because I knew nothing about like the language learning world basically.
Mm-hmm. And Arabic was something that is like a heritage language for you?
Yeah, I grew up with it. Like I speak my native dialect at home and went to Arabic school and things like that. But like at that point, I can't remember which video I watched. It might have been Lao Shu's video or Xiaoma, one of those two. And I watched one of their street interviews, and then like I remember when watching it, I was thinking like, damn, this is really cool, and like that was my initial impression. And I just like I kind of just figured out like from that was my initial like exposure to the language world, and from that I realized like it's a really cool thing to learn a language. You get to like speak to people that are different, and before you speak to them, like in your head there's possibly like a barrier between you and them because you don't really understand them, you don't really understand their culture, their history, you don't understand like where they've come from. But like with the language, you instantly kind of break that barrier and allow yourself to enter that. So once I watched those videos, I just went down the YouTube rabbit hole and discovered like loads of online polyglots. And yeah, like I took loads of advice from a lot of the online polyglots sharing their tips online in their videos. And then I chose Spanish. And yeah, I learned Spanish from that point on, like the end of August-ish.
And what made you choose Spanish? Were there other languages you were considering?
Yeah, it was between Swahili and Spanish. And then like between the two, I was like, Spanish has more resources. So
But why was it between Swahili and Spanish? Like, what was it that drew you to the Spanish language?
I don't actually remember specifically. Now when I look back, I don't remember. But at the time, I remember it was very clear. It was like I was interested in the culture and the history and things like that. Like the sounds definitely like interested me, but I don't actually remember why Spanish in particular. I'm not gonna lie.
Did you have any interest in Spanish before you started to get curious about language learning, or was this just something that you first kind of got interested in after learning about the polyglot community and things like that?
Yeah, so it was definitely like after I got into the polyglot community, and then I heard some Spanish. I don't know where it was from, but then that was like, oh, Spanish would be a cool option. And yeah, and then same thing with Swahili.
Yeah, and so then how did you first start trying to learn Spanish?
So I kind of hit the ground running thanks to like the online YouTube community, right? So like I didn't start with textbooks or like things that now I wouldn't do. I kind of started with one course called Language Transfer. I don't know if you know about it. It's like an audio course that like it's really good. Like I always recommend it. That kind of teaches you the patterns of the language, and it's really intuitive in the way that it works. So I really like that. And I went through that alongside doing Duolingo. So I did Duolingo for like maybe 5 minutes a day, but the majority of my time was spent doing language transfer. And yeah, so I really like that. And then after that, I always kept Duolingo in like 5 minutes a day max. Like I didn't really go more than that ever, but like I did it almost throughout the whole thing. But then after language transfer, I did...
And like how long did you spend on language transfer? Like how many weeks would you say?
it was 90 episodes. I think I did 2 a day. Must have been 2 months. I would say 2 months.
Okay, and like how much time per day were you spending on that?
I think I was spending, because it started in the summer holidays, so maybe like 45 minutes, and then once uni started, it was like half an hour a day.
Okay, so that's not too much. And then were you doing
Yeah.
anything outside of that, or was it pretty much just to learn the foundation, just putting in that 30 minutes to 45 minutes a day, working through this course?
Yeah, so it was pretty much just active study. I didn't even know that I could do anything passively at that point. So I wasn't listening to anything in my passive time. I was literally just doing I remember I started my sessions, I would do 3 to 5 minutes of Duolingo, maybe 2 or 3 lessons, and then I would do 2 lessons of language transfer, or 1, depending on holiday or not.
And then where'd you go from there?
So after that, like the course I used was Asimil, and then I discovered Link. And so I remember like I was doing like 1 day Asimil, 1 day Link. So I went through the Asimil course. I kind of like rushed through the last 30 by the end of it, just because I kind of felt like I really wanted to just kind of get it done. But for the first like 50, 60, I was really focused with it, and I did like very methodically. And then I was doing Link at the side, and I can't remember what I was using Link for. At that time I was using, I think, the first 20 mini stories that were on there. I used the Duolingo podcast for Spanish, which I think were really good for my level at the time.
Okay, so
yeah.
in this phase, like how much time were you spending on each of these things? So for the Asimil course, like how much time would you say you were spending on that a day?
It was like, actually, I remembered my sessions were like this. I did 2 to 3 minutes. This is my active study, like every morning, during uni time, so half an hour. The first like 2 to 3 minutes, 5 minutes were like Duolingo, and then I would do the Asimil lesson, which wouldn't take me long, would take me like 10 to 15 minutes, and then the other 10 to 15 minutes would be Link. So I think I played around with that half an hour session, and then I also played around with just doing a full half an hour session of Link and a full half an hour session of Asimil.
Okay,
So
and then you
just
said you
bounced
were
around
also
a bit.
listening to this other podcast. Like, was that more of an active thing or something that you were doing in the background?
So at that point, I was in Link when I was doing my active study. I was going through the transcripts of those podcasts, listening to them at the same time and doing the whole Link thing. And then I was listening to it passively, but not in an organized way. Because again, even at that time, I don't think I knew like the power of using my passive listening time, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just doing it for fun. I was like, okay, let me listen to the episodes. And I remember I'd listen to the episodes again and again and again. And then I'd go through them on Link and then continue to listen to them again. But I didn't do that with the mini stories, just the Duolingo podcasts.
And so the listening to the Duolingo podcast was something that was happening within that 30-minute study session?
Oh no, so listening to it and reading it at the same time was in that 30-minute study session as like my active study. But I just listened to the podcast again and again.
Okay, so like how many hours a day would you say you were listening to those podcasts for this period?
Like passively?
Yeah.
I have no idea. Like I just remember, no, it was not like an organized thing at all. So
yeah, but like maybe like just rough estimate, like 2 hours a day, 1 hour a day?
Maybe like half an hour a day, to be honest.
Okay, so not that much. So in the second period, it's still, again, pretty moderate time investment, like 30 minutes of pretty focused study in the morning, and then maybe listen to the podcast a couple times throughout the day. And how long, like time-wise, like week-wise, did this kind of second period continue for?
I don't know. In the video I made, like on speaking about it, like I went through my notes, so it's all like much more correct there. But like, I remember like, I don't know, the Asimil, I remember it went to like the first week of January or something like that. So I want to say another month and a half, 2 months, something like that.
Okay.
Of doing the Asimil alongside mini stories, Duolingo podcast on Link passively, and I think Steve's book that's on there as well, the audiobook.
Cool. And then where'd you go from there?
So then I wanted to continue the courses, even though like now I don't do that, but like much. But I went to Glossica, so I played around with Glossica for 2 weeks. But then after 2 weeks, they said I did all the sentences, so I just kind of was like, okay, I'm gonna leave that.
All of them.
And then I tried, yeah, all of them, yeah.
Wow.
So I just left it. I was like, okay. And then after that, I did a grammar book. I did like the first like 10 chapters or something like that. I had to push my way through it because I remember at that point what I was using for Link was a TV show that I was really into. So I'd like have the TV show in like 3/4 of my screen, and then like a quarter would be Link. And so I'd watch the TV show, and then every single like word that I didn't know, I just pause it, put it on Link, save the word, whatever, and keep going. I was really into the TV show. So I remember like it would be 2 to 3 minutes of Duolingo. I don't know why I kept Duolingo going. I think it was just the streak, to be honest with you. But like the 2 to 3 minutes of Duolingo, and then it was like 7 to 10 minutes of the book, and then 10 to 15 minutes of the 10 to 15, or I would say 15 to 20, because I had more time at that time, of Link doing the TV show. And I think I went along the grammar book for like 4 weeks.
Okay, cool. So throughout this whole time, you have a pretty consistent kind of study regimen where you kind of block out this half an hour to 45-minute period, and every day you put in those focused minutes and then kind of move on with the rest of your day. So that's pretty cool that you could keep that up really consistently.
Yeah. And just something to mention about the passive listening is every Sunday I would batch cook for the week, right? And so that would take me like 3.5 hours. And so when I was doing the Asimil lessons, I would listen to the Asimil again and again and again during that time. And like when I was ironing and stuff, slowly, pretty much like without knowing, like actively planning my passive listening time, I would be using that time for passive listening, just out of enjoyment, before I kind of knew that I should kind of be using that. And then when I started the second I finished like Glossica and starting the grammar thing and starting the TV show especially, my passive listening time was real podcasts, and it wasn't anything that I was studying in my active. Like it was different. It was a completely different podcast that I found interesting, and so that's what I was using for my passive listening time. And I could confidently say around 3.5 hours to 4 hours a week, 1 day a week. But I don't know how well I was utilizing my other passive listening time, because again, it wasn't like something I was super conscious of.
Yeah. And was this podcast something that was made for native speakers?
Yeah. So it's a radio in Mexico.
And how long how much were you understanding at this point of that podcast?
So at the start, I was like, I knew what they were talking about. Like I knew what the topic was. Like it was talking about like cooking or whatever. But like, and I knew like her opinion was this. He was saying something along these lines. It was like, let's say 35-ish% comprehension. Sometimes I'd understand sentences, but then like I wouldn't understand like whole blocks. But like throughout that time, like I think that was like the most rapid growth period, this time that I started using the TV show on Link and listening to that podcast passively, because that was a time where I feel like I got so many words from my active learning through the TV show. Because I remember like when I first started the TV show, because like when you upload an episode, the episodes were like 50 minutes long, and when I uploaded them to Link, it would come up to 3 lessons, and in each lesson there was like 365 or something crazy like that new words. So at the start it was really slow. Like I remember it took me like a week to get through an episode, basically, something like that. And then like it sped up really, really fast. And I remember like throughout that time, maybe it was like 2-ish months. It's all very blurry in my head, but like say around 2 months. By the time I got to like episode 45, so that's like 45-ish hours of that, like I remember I would watch like maybe like 4 minutes of the show without actually having to pause it, which was just, it was really satisfying to see that, like so like struggling with literally every single sentence at the start to slowly being able to understand it. And the same thing happened with my passive listening with the podcast, because like at the start, again, just I know what the topic is, I know what's the general vibes, but slowly I was able to understand like more words and like more sentences, and like that whole process was just so fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. So for that TV show, was this like something you found on Netflix, or where was the show coming from?
Yeah, it was Netflix. It was called Bolivar. It was the story of like Simon Bolivar, who liberated a few countries in America, in Latin America, from Spanish colonization. So it was his whole story told in a TV show format. It wasn't like a documentary, and so there was loads of dialogue. Cool. And yeah, that was really cool. 60 episodes.
Nice. And then how did you get that into Link?
So you just like the extension.
Subdub?
So like you just leave.
Language learning with Netflix?
Oh no, like Link has their own.
Oh, they have an importer?
Yeah, the importer, yeah. So like the extension, you just click on it and then you just put it into the folder and then it uploads it for you automatically.
Oh, cool. And then in Link, so you're highlighting all these words that you didn't know. Did you explicitly study those words afterwards through the flashcard system in there?
No, I don't actually really like the flashcard system too much. I just don't like I just rather have it just like a normal flashcard basically. And I never really used flashcards like during the system. I remember like throughout like the first 3 months, because I had heard from my research that flashcards would be a good idea. So I remember always trying to get myself to use, like I remember I played around with Thank for a bit on a pre-made deck. I tried using the Link flashcards, but I just couldn't get myself to do it. I'd always prefer to just go through the TV show. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I know I never like actively tried to go over that vocab in any way after it.
So, well, that from my point of view, it's kind of like, so you're saying there's these hundreds of words at the beginning that you're marking in LingQ, but what was the point of marking them in LingQ if you didn't do anything to follow through with like reviewing them or something?
Right, I know what you mean. It was like the same words, I would see them pop up again, like in the content, right? Like, so those 100 words would come back again in the next episode, in the next scenes, in the next episode. So like, the more I see them within context, I would just be like, oh, I know this word now. Like, I just, like the fifth time I see it, I was like, okay, fine, I can just mark it as known. And that's kind of how I did it. Like the repetitions, let's say, were within the content itself. I didn't like actively do it. I just kind of like went through the TV show.
So do you think you would have had a similar effect if you didn't use LingQ at all and you were just looking up the words with like a pop-up dictionary?
Yeah, I guess. Like if I had the subtitles and I was able to see the words every time.
Yeah,
yeah,
because like now there's a free extension for Chrome called Language Learning with Netflix, where you can have the target language subtitles and your native language subtitles on top of each other, and you can click on any word and it will show you the definition right there. So it kind of sounds like maybe you could have just used that. It would have potentially have been even more streamlined.
I know about that extension. I haven't used it like actively. I've just downloaded it and like played around with it. But I like the way that LingQ like shows you like you've seen this word before. Now you've saved it.
Because that's what I was wondering if that was actually like giving you extra benefits. Because I know being reminded of the fact that like, oh, you actually have seen this word before, or maybe you've seen it twice, that could have an additional like memory benefit potentially, I could see.
Yeah, possibly.
So you feel like maybe that did help you out a little bit?
Yeah, possibly. I'm not sure actually. I'm not sure if like the idea that like you're like, oh, I saw this word before actually helps with your memory. But possibly. I'm not sure. I like the fact that like if you watch it with the language learning with Netflix add-on, like when you're watching the show, you kind of have to process both the subtitles at the same time, or you have to pause it and check it, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a mode where you can blur the English subtitles until you hover over them. So like that's what I would recommend to people who were still a relative beginner in a language, is watch with the target language subtitles and have the English ones blurred. And if you need them, then hover over it. But try to just go without the English. Then when you get more advanced, I'd say just get rid of the English and focus on the target language ones.
Yeah, okay. I think that would actually have the similar effect then. If you have the, like, for example, if I was watching the Spanish show, dubbed obviously, and the Spanish subtitles, but then the English wasn't there, so I'm like in the show, but like I'm only looking the words that I don't want, because that's what I liked about LingQ, the idea that I was in the show and then only what I didn't know I would check.
Yeah, that's what I recommend too. Yeah, because I also think if you always have the full sentence translation, it encourages translation in your head. Like this full sentence in Spanish equals this full sentence in English, which is something that is inevitable when you're first picking up a language. You're going to have these like sentence translations going on in your head, but ideally you want to drop that and just be understanding your target language in your target language, and only be looking up, like only referring to English on a word level, ideally, I'd say.
Yeah. So you can like absorb the structures in a more natural way, like directly from the language. Yeah, I know what you mean. And I think that was my experience, I think, with like language, like, you know, the phase where I do like language transformational. That was a phase where like I was really actively analyzing the language, even when I was using the mini stories or whatever else what I was using, or the dialogues or whatever. Like I was actively analyzing the structures. I was like, okay, this means this and this is put here, that. But like the more I watched TV shows, the more I listened, the less it became active analysis, and the more it just kind of like you just understand it, and you just kind of let yourself like be comfortable with the structures.
Yeah, and that's interesting, because I know that like Luca Lampariello has a bi-directional translation technique that kind of sounds like it's similar to what you're saying with the more active analysis, and it's something you can do in the beginning of learning a new language to really kind of kickstart that language learning process. And I think that makes a lot of sense for languages that have somewhat similar structures, like, you know, English and Spanish are from the same big language family. I mean, English isn't a Romance language, but they all derive from, you know, Proto-Indo-European and stuff. So they have like similar structures, and because of that, I think you can get pretty far with using your analytical mind to kind of compare and contrast what's similar and what's different. But I think if you're learning a language that is totally different than your native language, like Chinese or Japanese, then that analysis can't take you as far, because the structures are so different. It's like almost impossible to wrap your mind around until you've actually spent a significant amount of time with the language. And so I'd say that's something that I think is different depending on whether you're approaching a kind of language that's similar to your native language or one that's totally different?
Right, that's interesting. Yeah, I'll keep that in mind if I ever choose to learn one of those, because like yeah, that helps, and it helped with Swahili as well, because like grammatically wise, Swahili, between Spanish, Arabic and English, Swahili like doesn't have that many surprises. I would say the noun classes, because it has like I think six, I don't know how many, but like it has a certain amount of noun classes. That's the only real thing that's like really different. But everything else I've seen here or there, like the idea that one word contains loads of different things in them, like the tense and like who you're talking to and who's doing it or whatever, that's something that's like used a lot in Arabic, and so many other different things. So yeah, like I would say that like Swahili is also close to it. But I know like language transfer, because I think language transfer possibly is very similar to that translation method, because the way he does it is like he tells you how it is. He'll be like, in English we say I want it, but in Spanish it will be it I want, so how would that be? And then he kind of like walks you along like that. So I feel like that's why possibly language transfer and this analytical method worked with Swahili as well as Spanish for me.
That makes sense. Well, let's get to your Swahili in a little bit. Let's go back to your language learning journey. So one other thing I wanted to ask you about was, so you said that when you started listening to this podcast, you weren't understanding all that much at the beginning. And same thing with the shows. There were all these words you didn't know. So did you have any doubts that maybe this wasn't going to be an effective technique and maybe you should find something more like on your level? Or how did you think about that?
That's interesting. The thing is, yeah, that's actually a good question, because from the start, like my perception of learning Spanish for me right from the start was this is going to take 3 to 4 or 5 years. And like that's what I had, and that time frame just kept getting smaller and smaller the more I actually saw like how fast I was progressing. And like by the end I was like, I'm still surprised at like how fast like I was able to get to that level, right? So that was my attitude. My attitude was like, I don't care how long it takes, I'm enjoying it, so I'm just going to continue with it. And so I think that's what made me like
that sounds like a really important point. And that's actually really interesting, because I think a lot of people go into the opposite mindset. They kind of don't think too critically about how long it's really going to take to reach their goal, but I think most people aren't thinking it's going to take them years, right? They're more hoping like months. Like, hey, maybe if I consistently do my Duolingo every day, then by this time next year, I'll be pretty good. Like they kind of have that mindset. And then they might find out, oh, this is a lot bigger commitment than I initially realized. So
right, yeah. No, I started with like, this is going to take a really long time. Like I kept that mindset even after I researched. I was like, yeah, this is going to take a really long time, because like I know people who've been learning language with like school and stuff, and they've taken a really long time to get to a certain level. So I was like, I expected the same. And then once I did my language research, I was like, okay, maybe I'll be able to do it faster with the more effective methods. And then throughout the journey, it just like my mind, I was like, oh, maybe I am able to finish the TV show earlier, or maybe, oh, I like actually understand 60 to 70% of the podcast now. Maybe in a month I'll be able to understand more. And it's the same thing with Swahili now, to be honest with you. It's like, I still feel like, oh, it'll take me so long to get to that level, because everything's so blurry and everything's so like, I'll never get used to this structure, you know, like the way they say this is just so like odd and different. And then slowly, your mind just kind of like adapts to it.
Cool. So, yeah, definitely. I talk a lot about this idea of tolerating ambiguity, which is, being able to stick with content, even if you're not understanding 100% of it, even if you're understanding a relatively small amount of it. And that's something that's really difficult for a lot of people, because it's something that you don't really tend to practice in other areas of life as an adult. Normally adults are competent at most things that they have to do in a day. And so this idea of having the expectation that language learning is going to take a really long time, enabling you to tolerate ambiguity better, is really interesting. I've never really heard that or thought about that before.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because I remember like, I'll give you an example from Spanish, like the I want it's I want, right? In Spanish, like they put the it at the start. I remember at the start I was like, this is going to take me forever to like be able to understand when I hear it, because like you have to think of it and then I want first. Like I remember being like really hooked up on that, and then like now I can use it like really like fluently. It's like just so natural. So that's like just one example of that kind of structure. Like I apply that now with Swahili. It's just like I see a structure that looks weird, and I'm like, this is a different way of constructing this way, like, and then I'm just like, oh, just it's fine, just leave it. After reading it 100 times, it'll stick. You know what I mean? And like that just allows me to just enjoy the content and enjoy the process, and just be like, the things I don't understand, it just needs time. So I just need to stick with it.
Yeah, totally. Katsumoto from AJAT said that you don't learn a language, you get used to it, right? So
yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, getting back to your journey. So we kind of covered the first 6 months. And so for these first 6 months, were you doing any speaking or any output at all, or were you just focusing on building your comprehension?
So when this was like 7 to 8 months, let's say by the time like the podcasts were like 60 to 70, like 80-ish% like comprehensible, I would start speaking to myself, like, because like I like planning my day and planning like things in general, and I usually do that in English. But I was just like, okay, let me see if I could do it in Spanish, because like when I heard it like so much and read it so much, like so much just exposure to it, I just felt the urge. It wasn't like, okay, now I need to plan my output for Spanish. It was more like, let's just see if I could do it. Like, it was always just like a fun thing to do, and I kept doing that a lot and playing around with Spanish, like just a lot in my head and trying to think in Spanish. And like when I heard things, I tried to translate it in my head to Spanish, like, oh, how would they say it in Spanish, and I tried to say that. So that's the extent of my output for the majority of like that time. Like, say from the start of doing the TV show to like till like now, like I always tried to just play around with Spanish in my head and speak. But in terms of speaking to other people, in my university there was like language exchanges. I went to like 3, and again, I never went there with the expectation to like have a full-on like deep conversation with someone. I just went there to just be like, just for fun, just to see if I could say anything, if I could communicate at all, just to meet people who could speak Spanish and see what they think of like my progress so far, because like I knew no one else who was learning any language. So it's like it'd just be cool to get some feedback on like what I've been doing for the past 6-7 months by myself.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
definitely.
And so I went to like 3 or 4 of them, but I think that was the extent of my output until I actually got tutors.
Cool. And so, like, when you first started speaking to yourself in your head like that, did you find that it came pretty easily? Like, you didn't have to, like, really kind of clench your mind, so to speak, to get the Spanish out? It was kind of like when you thought about it, you found that it would come pretty naturally?
I feel the same way that I feel now, and that is like the less I think about it actively, the smoother it goes. The more actively I try to think about it, like it's like I need to believe that like it's in my head. I just need to kind of let it go out. But the more actively I'm like, okay, how would they say this? The less it goes. And like I remember at the start when I was thinking in my head, it was like obviously like really short things and really like not any complex like long thoughts planning. It was just like parts of it, and I'd fill in the English words that I didn't like know or whatever. But yeah, I didn't feel like that much resistance. I felt like I was just flowing with it.
Cool. And so, yeah, so then how did your studies continue on after that kind of 6 to 7, 8 month mark?
So once my exams finished, I booked tutors on italki. The first week I did like a couple of trial lessons, and then I did, for the next 4 weeks, I did 4 hours each week, 1 hour sessions. So 4 1-hour sessions each week for 4 weeks. So that was like 16 hours in totals of actual lessons minus the trial time. And during that time, because it was a holiday, I was doing like an hour of study. An hour of study would, at that point, was like watching YouTube vlogs and things like that on link. Because I surprisingly, like even after the show, I still had like loads of words that I missed. I think when I start speaking to tutors, I must have had like 18,500 or like 19,000 words on link, which is of course is not like the most accurate representation, but it gives you an idea. And then like during that time, I went all the way up to like 22,000 in that like month, around that time, around like that number, consuming like YouTube videos, and yeah, I think that was it. Like just a lot of YouTube videos, because that was like the spoken language, and I really liked that. Yeah, and so that helped me with like my output. Yeah.
So for that next period, it was like 1 hour a day active immersion, like just getting input, and then in addition to that, 4 hours a week of an italki lesson.
Yeah, and the passive listening at that time was much more like solid as well. So it was an hour of active, but it was also like possibly an hour, possibly more, passive a day.
Okay, cool. So now you're really starting to kind of pick things up more, where you have hour active, hour passive, plus additional like output practice with italki tutors.
Yeah.
And so did you find that you improved pretty quickly in that period with the additional time investment?
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like at the start, like when I was doing like language transformational and stuff, like investing more time possibly wouldn't have helped me that much. But now that I could like get into real content that I really liked, I felt like the more I got into it, like I was assimilating words like really, really rapidly, I felt. And my word count was just going up and up. So yeah, I definitely feel like it helped a lot. Also, just one thing to mention, during that time where I was in uni, there was a 3-month Easter holiday. and that was the time where Corona hit, or like was like weeks after it. So like there was a bit more time at that time. So I remember like I was doing more. I think there was like an hour active during those 3 weeks as well.
Cool. When you say an hour active, you mean an additional hour, or?
No, an hour active. Like, yeah.
I see. Well, I thought you said that even before it, at that point, you were like doing an hour of like actively watching YouTube videos with Link and stuff.
Oh, that was like after my exams. So wait, let me just make it clear. So like from like say January all the way to like mid-May for my exams, I was doing like 45 minutes a day, right, of active. But there was 3 weeks within that where I did an hour just because I had extra time.
Okay,
basically.
Cool.
And my passive was getting better and better because I was becoming more conscious of like its benefits, basically. So I was like putting it into different activities that I was doing, and I was like kind of like organically trying to like find points in my day to put it in, because I was just wanting to listen more. And then after my exams finished, that's when I had the 1 week trial lessons, and that's where I had the 4 weeks of output.
Cool. And so was this kind of taking you, does this period take you all the way to that 10th month mark where you kind of felt like you'd reached your goal?
I think so. I think I did the video speaking to one of my tutors a week after that 4 weeks of output, or that weekend or something like that. It was the exact 10-month mark because I know Duolingo told me, because I remember when I first started Spanish, I started on Duolingo. So when Duolingo hit 280 days or something like that, I lost the streak now, but when it hit the 280 days, I'm like, that's when I made the video with my tutor and uploaded it.
And so when we were just chatting real quick before we started this interview, you kind of said that you met your goal with Spanish, and then while trying to maintain it, you started to pick up Swahili. So how did you know that you had met your goal in Spanish? Because like you said, initially you thought that this might be something that takes multiple years. Yeah.
So basically being able to like put on any YouTube video in Spanish and understand at least like 98% of it. Any podcast I would like not like a science podcast or like, I don't know, like a specific, I'd say like advanced level thing, just like any YouTube video, any TV show, like I'd understand at least 95% of it. And being able to like speak fluently, like ish. Okay, that's a dangerous word, but like generally, like generally being able to put my point across and like have a conversation with someone, I felt comfortable to leave it in like maintenance mode. Yeah.
And then
I reached sorry, I think I reached.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I reached it like around 23-ish thousand words on Link. So I was like, that's probably a good place to like maintain it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I don't really know what to make of those numbers, because I think if it depends a lot on how you're counting what is a word, and you know, are these two things two separate words, or are they the same word in two different forms? And then there's also like, how many of those do you actually know if you were like quizzed out of context and stuff? Because I think if you actually knew 20,000 words, that would be more than some native speakers maybe who haven't gone to higher education or something. Yeah, I think like the average vocabulary of a native speaker 20-year-old in most languages is like 20,000 words, I think.
Oh, right, okay.
But I mean, I'm not confident on that, and it could be different per language. But I mean, again, there's a lot of different ways of counting, so it's kind of tricky. So, like, because I know for me, when I had almost 20,000 Anki cards for Japanese, I found that I knew more words generally than a lot of Japanese people who I talked to, because to get that many words, I had to be reading lots of books and learning words that aren't very common, don't really come up in daily conversation. And so there were some native speakers who I met who didn't know those. So I'm like curious how Link gets that number and what the kind of background on that is. But anyway, I mean, I'm sure you know a lot of words.
Yeah, there's so many factors that make that number like not 100% reliable. Like because of so many cognates with Spanish and English, there's probably more words that I don't know. It counts every single form of a word, like the past tense, the future tense, whatever, as different words. So there's probably,
okay. So that would explain why it might be a little bit inflated.
Yeah, exactly. And so like there's so many words probably on my vocabulary list that are marked as still learning or don't know, but actually I know it because I know the other versions of the word. I just never came across it again in my content to move it to known.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, like, you might pick up words in a conversation with somebody, right? And you might just happen to have not come across that word, which you do know within Link. And so Link doesn't know that you know it, but actually you do.
Yeah. There's so many things. It's just, I just use it as like a general...
Yeah, totally. Well, yeah, similar indicator. Thing how, I would use my Anki card count as a kind of a general indicator. of how many words I knew, even though I knew there were many words I knew that weren't in Aki. So yeah, it's nice to have
Yeah.
something like that, right? Otherwise, it's just you have literally no idea at all. So
Yeah, yeah. It's always and it's also nice to like see your progress as well. It's like
Mhm.
that motivated me a lot. Like every time I reached a new 1,000, that was like a dopamine rush
yeah, totally.
that kept me going.
Cool. And so, yeah, like how did native speakers react like when you spoke to them in Spanish after you had hit that 10-month mark and were feeling pretty good?
Right. So I definitely improved throughout that 4 weeks speaking to my tutors. But I would say like because of so much input, I hit the ball running. Like I remember my first conversation was like an actual conversation. So it was like an actual conversation about how I learned Spanish and yes, how they reacted. Like to be honest with you, every single one of my tutors was pretty surprised. They were always like, "You learned it so fast. Like you speak like generally pretty well." And yeah, definitely by the end it was better because I think output helps your input, which then in turn helps your output again. Um, but yeah, generally like they were mostly surprised about like how fast I was able to get to that level.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I imagine. And like, what about now? Have you ever had any opportunities to speak to a Spanish speaker in real life and see how they react?
Not with like this level. No, like the last time I spoke to someone in real life was like pre-corona language exchange where I was like telling a story but like with really bad everything.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of like an unfortunate time for the output stage of language learning now with the pandemic and stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
But cool. So, and then what about reading? Like, was that something that was important to you, or like reading in literature, things like that in Spanish?
It's definitely important now that I like in the maintenance phase I want to like keep it slowly advancing, and the only way I can get forward really is to read because I just need so much more words. But no, at that stage it was literally just the subtitles of videos, subtitles of TV shows, sometimes subtitles of podcasts, but like I didn't really do that much. So yeah,
Cool.
that was the extent of my reading.
And so moving on to kind of Swahili. So you said that, like I mentioned a little bit ago, as we were chatting, you told me that, yeah, you started to pick up Swahili after that 10-month mark and you were trying to continue slowly advancing your Spanish through reading.
Yeah. Wait, did I pick up Swahili after that 10-month mark? I feel like I'm not sure. I think I picked up Swahili like the second my exams finished.
So even before you hit the 10-month mark.
Yeah, so because it was summer holiday, so I was able to put like a month into Spanish, an hour into Spanish, and I think and half an hour into Swahili. I think at that time, it's all in my diary videos. I record it much more meticulously there, but yeah. So I think I started it there because I remember like I was itching to finish my exams just to start Swahili. Like I had everything ready. I just really wanted to start, so I started it from there up till now.
That's interesting. So even though at that point, what was your estimated time of completion for the Spanish project, so to speak? Like, how much longer do you think it was going to take?
I don't know, because I definitely felt ready for output. That's why I was like, okay, let's get the tutors. I don't know. I don't think I ever really knew at any point of it. I was just like, okay, now I feel like ready to output. I understand a lot of what I'm listening and reading to. So let's get some tutors, and it takes as long as it takes. If these tutors, like, if I need more tutors after, or if I need more input before I continue with tutors or whatever, I'll do that.
Yeah.
I didn't really have anything in mind.
That's really interesting. It sounds like you're, in a way, not all that goal-oriented. And that sounds like that actually really helped you out because it helped you focus on just being wherever you were at in the process and staying engaged. And you didn't have the sense of that you're not there yet. Because a lot of times I think both myself and many other language learners tend to be very goal-oriented. And whenever you're fixated on some goal that lies in the future, then by definition, then you start to feel like your current self is inadequate. And that can make just being present and enjoying the process really difficult.
Yeah, I understand that. I think it's because of two things. First of all, I was fortunate enough to like come at a time where the YouTube polyglot community, like there's already so many good videos from so many good experienced polyglots that like I knew this was a problem that existed, and so I took their advice on that, like you should just focus on what it is, you shouldn't like look at the goals, etc. And a second thing that helped, I think, is just the way I organize things in my life in general. I never really say like, okay, I want to achieve this amount by this time. I always am like, okay, this is how I do it, this is the time I'm splitting to it, just get involved and see how it goes, and just enjoy yourself while you're doing it, and then like after a month mark, see how much you've done and see what you could have done better, and just keep moving from there rather than
that's awesome. I mean, I think the results speak for themselves in a way.
Thank you.
So yeah, I think that's really some really valuable insight for other language learners out there. But I'm still curious, did you not have any worry that if you picked up Swahili while working on Spanish, it would be difficult to balance the two? You'd kind of have to be juggling them, and you couldn't give your full attention to either one.
I know, yeah, that's a good question. I can't actually remember. I was just really excited to start Swahili.
Yeah, I mean, it
At the
makes
time.
sense given that you're that kind of mindset. And so, what was your experience of trying to basically learn Swahili and keep going like full speed ahead with Spanish?
Because at that point in Spanish, I had finished Bolivar, the show, and I had already like possibly started with some YouTube. Like my comprehension was pretty high of like that kind of level of content. So I was like, there's no way I'm gonna lose like what I've already gained from Spanish, especially that I'm still putting in an hour of active input and an hour of output 4 times a week. Like I felt like Spanish was good because I was already putting in a good amount of time with it, if you know what I mean. And with Swahili, I was right at the start, so I was doing language transfer with Duolingo, and like listening to really like basic dialogues as my passive listening. I just felt like I think the fact that it was a summer holiday helped a lot because I had the time to be able to be like, okay, I could dedicate the amount of time I was going to dedicate to Spanish anyway, and then just on top of it I could put Swahili.
Yeah, cool. And so then it was more like when you hit that 10-month mark with Spanish, not that you're going to start Swahili, but now it's like, okay, I'm going to switch gears and now make Swahili the focus and put Spanish in the more kind of maintenance background mode.
Yeah, and that's what happened. Like,
and how many months had you been learning Swahili at that point in time?
Maybe a month and a week, or like a month and a half. I'm not sure, something like that.
Cool. And then when you made that shift, like, did you have any ideas of what you wanted to do differently about Swahili versus when you learned
I definitely
Spanish?
wanted. Yeah, definitely. Like I learned so much from like my Spanish journey. Definitely, like first of all, listening from the start. Like I found this really beginner like thing called Lingua Boost, where it's like you hear the English, which I know we shouldn't really do, like listen to the like English while you're learning the target language. But I found it really helpful, like right from the start, from zero. You hear the English and then you hear the Swahili. So in that time where I'm still trying to like be actively thinking about the structures and stuff, that's really useful to hear the English and then be like, okay, so this is how they say Swahili, and you try to like attach the words with the meaning and like the structure and stuff. Like I think it helps with that, because otherwise I don't think I'd have much to listen to right at the start that wouldn't be completely incomprehensible and like just noise. So yeah, that's the first thing I did, was get into like listening in using my passive listening time basically effectively. I did language transfer. That was a good thing that I did with Spanish, I think. I didn't have ASML for Swahili, so I used Teach Yourself, which I didn't like for many reasons, but I got through it and I used it in a way that worked for me. Like I got out of it what I felt like I wanted from it. So yeah, so like that's something that helped me a lot, like learning from Spanish. Like I knew exactly what I wanted from that course. So I didn't like spend time reading all the grammar explanations. I did no exercises. They have like 10 points of grammar at the end. I would go through the dialogue, like put it onto the site that I'm using, to go through it just like Link, and then I would read those 10 points, and whichever 10 points I got. If I didn't get it, I'd just mark it and move on. I didn't like try to understand it or anything. I just moved on. So I knew how to use the resources in the way that I liked. And yeah, like now I finished language transfer and Teach Yourself, and I'm just literally just listening and reading to content at my level.
Cool. And how long has it been now since you first started Swahili?
4 months from tomorrow.
Cool. So, I mean, I don't want to plug my own content right now, but it kind of sounds like, compared to how you learn Spanish, the way that you're now learning Swahili is a little bit more in kind of line with like what I would recommend, which is like definitely put in some active study towards the beginning to help kickstart your learning of this new language. But then after that, where you really want to get to is just consuming content and learning directly from the content. And it's through that immersion, that input, that you really get fundamentally better at the language.
Yeah, if I could go back, I wouldn't do the grammar book for Spanish, and I wouldn't do Glossica. I think I could have just went straight into the TV show, and I would have been absolutely fine. Possibly even gone faster.
Cool. And I'm also wondering, so one of the things that I talk about on my channel is actually actively waiting to output until you have a solid foundation in input. And it sounds like this is what you did in Spanish. Like you said, your very first conversation, you already could have an actual fleshed out, meaningful conversation. And I talk about how this might actually have potential benefits, not just in the efficiency of your study, but also in the like in terms of that it's just not the best use of time to be speaking early on, because you just don't know enough of the language to be really saying anything meaningful anyway. But also that if you try to speak a lot early on, then you might actually create bad habits because you won't have enough of a foundation to speak the language naturally. And then you'll have to overcome these bad habits later. So it's actually better in the long run to just wait until you'll be able to speak largely naturally and correctly the first time and avoid making bad habits. So was this part of your thinking? Is this part of your thinking now or not really?
It was part of my thinking then, and it's part of my thinking now, but not from like learning from my own experience. That was one of the things that I learned from YouTube polyglots that I applied in my own thing. I was like, okay, I don't need to speak. All the output that I did speaking to myself and playing around with the language, that was purely because I was enjoying it. It was never planned. It was never anything like that. And I think because the input, like I would know if I said something wrong. You know what I mean? And if I tried to correct it, I'd be like, how would they say it? And then if I couldn't do it, I'd just leave it and just be like, okay, I don't know how to say that. Let's just move on. Let's just go back to English. And then I just tried to say something else. So yeah, definitely, like I was not stressing about output at all.
Cool. Yeah. So I totally agree. It's totally in line with like how I think about it, especially like what you said. If you don't know how to say it, then you don't know how to say it. Don't just make something up, because that's probably going to be either like totally wrong or at least a little bit unnatural at the best. So
yeah. And during that time, like when I actually got into output, like touching on the fact that how output helps my input, because when I went into output, like speaking to my tutors, and I wouldn't know how to say something, and like I was stuck, I was like, okay, how do you say if I had been there? Like those kind of constructions that sometimes are really difficult. When I go back to my input, I just feel like I put my analytical like mind back on, and I'm like, okay, that's how it's constructed. Because at the start I was analytical, but then the more I listened and read, the more I just kind of like, because you comprehend more and you just get used to it, and you kind of stop being analytical because you're just understanding what's happening. But then when you go back into output, I think it makes you like actively think and analytical again, but only at the points that you feel like you couldn't express in the output. And so like your input becomes more effective, like more like fine-tuned at that period.
100%. Yeah, I totally agree. That's been my experience as well. It just helps you become aware of the holes in your knowledge so that you can pay more attention to them. But ultimately, the knowledge is still coming from the input, right? It's not like you're fundamentally learning how to say something new by trying to say it. It's by trying to say it, you become aware of the fact you don't know how to say it, and then that enables you to pay better attention in your input and absorb more from the input. But ultimately, it's all coming from the input.
Yeah. And it's like even those difficult constructions, like before I'd output, if I read it and listened to it, I'd understand it. But when I come to output it, it's just like, oh, how's that said? Like if you said it to me, I'd understand it. I'd be like, oh yeah, that's how. But like, yeah, like you said, it just makes you much more aware of like the things you lack. Yeah.
So like just going back to your experience with Swahili now. So you mentioned a little bit before we started the interview that in some ways it's easier, in some ways it's harder. So why don't you go to a little bit about that?
Yeah, okay. So like pronunciation wise, it's pretty straightforward. There's some things that you need to know of, but like language transfer made the points there. And once you know that, you kind of know it. And with listening, it's like the pronunciation is not a big deal. In terms of grammar, the one big thing is the noun classes, I think, for me. Because there's like different noun classes, so it's not split by genders, it's split by like nature and like people, like animate things and words that came from other languages, which helps a lot with Arabic because there's a lot of like Arabic words in Swahili, which actually helps a lot. And a bit of English as well. And so there's different noun classes. That's the main thing that's like different grammatically, but everything else between Spanish, English and Arabic, like it's pretty intuitive. I just kind of need to get used to it. Like there's nothing that jumps at me like, oh, the word order is like super different or something like that. And yeah, like the biggest thing with Swahili, I think, is just the amount of resources. Like with Spanish, there was just so many, and at every single stage there was just so many. Like in the beginner phase, there was TV shows oriented towards beginners, like speaking really slowly with the subtitles. It's just like everything's really nice. And then in the intermediate, you had the Duolingo podcast, and then you had like conversations that would translate, like just the ideal situation. And then like the real content, Netflix, YouTube, like so much that I had to choose which ones I liked. But with Swahili, it's like, this is the beginner content that there is, this is the intermediate content that there is, and this is like the like upper intermediate content that there is, and that's and then there's the native level content, which of course is endless in every language. But then for the content that I can use that have text and audio, it's limited. So that's why, like right now, I'm using conversations, and the conversations are like pretty natural. I think they're scripted, but like they're at a normal pace, and like it feels like it was scripted to be spoken normally, and then it was spoken at a normal pace, basically. So it's definitely at my level, but so like that's good content, right? And there's 135 of those, so I'm like, that's my main thing now. But then after that, there's one other thing that's text and audio, and then after that I have nothing. I just have like articles with no audio. I have podcasts with no transcriptions. I have TV shows with no subtitles, YouTube videos with no subtitles. Like I'm out in the open, so that's why I'm trying to make the most out of this content that I have now.
How about like dictionaries? Are there good dictionaries?
So I'm using a site that's kind of like Link, called Language Tools, where you can again put like content on it, kind of like Link, but just like less features basically. The dictionary on it, so the automatic one is Google Translate, which works. It works a lot of the time, but not all the time. But then they have like a link to africanlanguages.com dictionary or something like that, which tends to be better. And like 85% of the time it's fine, but 15% of the time I do doubt it, because like the definition is completely out of context. Like that's not what they wanted to say. So it's not the best situation, but it's like workable.
Okay, so it kind of sounds like once you get to the point where you can consume native content and it's not too incomprehensible, then in a way you'll be all right, because like you said, there's an unlimited amount of native content. Just the real bottleneck might be that finding out the meanings of new words, right? Because you can look them up in these resources, but like you said, it's like 80% of the time maybe it works and you get a good sense of what the word means, but then there's other times where it just doesn't. And so for those, you'll probably either have to just kind of infer what they mean over time, or maybe get a tutor and just ask them explicitly. So that definitely is something that I could see slowing things down a little bit compared to like a language like Spanish, where you can instantly find out exactly what any word means if you look it up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's kind of frustrating. It's like that part shouldn't be what's limiting it. You know what I mean? Like just the dictionary.
Yeah, because it's like doesn't have to be that way, right? Like someone could just make a better dictionary and then this would be solved.
Exactly. Like, it feels like such like a little technicality.
Yeah, it's like
that's
it's not
actually
inherent
really
in the language. So
yeah, exactly.
That's really.
But I think it's good enough. It's good enough for me to go through the content. Like when I go through the conversations, I understand what's going on. But like it's just a couple of words. Yeah, it can be a bit annoying. But
definitely still sounds workable. But yeah, just a little bit more challenging because of that.
Yeah.
And so, how has your experience been maintaining Spanish while learning Swahili?
It was good for the first like month or so. I've kind of fallen off the ball with Spanish a little bit. Everything of mine is in Spanish, so like my laptop's in Spanish. My phone's in Swahili now, but like my laptop's in Spanish. Like again, when I think to myself, I think in Spanish. Like when I write things, I try to write in Spanish. Like I try to integrate it, but that like active slot has kind of drizzled away. I'm trying to bring it back, and because I think Link makes it very easy with the books, right? Like I can just read a book on Link and it's very easy. And when I was reading a book, because I was reading a book about something that I actually wanted to learn about, so I would take notes, and when I was taking notes from the book, I would take it in Spanish with a Spanish keyboard, so like my accents and stuff, because that's a really annoying part, like you have to know the accent. I was learning that, and I would summarize the information and write it in Spanish. I feel like that's a good advanced level thing that I was doing, so hopefully I can get back to that reading. But just reading, like I feel like the only way I can like increase my comprehension is just to read.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. And so, I mean, just kind of like wrapping up a little bit. So we already talked about how you're not really exactly a goal-oriented person, but where do you see yourself taking language learning in the future? Like, is there anything you want to do with Spanish and Swahili in particular? Are there other languages you want to learn after that? So
right now I'm obviously focusing on Swahili, trying to maintain Spanish and Arabic, I guess, in the side. I definitely have other languages I want to learn after like Swahili, so I'll see how that goes, but my ultimate goal is always to bring them to an advanced level, and I know that puts a cap on how many languages you can realistically learn in your lifetime. So I'm not sure. Do you mean
bring them and maintain them at a high level?
We'll see how it goes, but that's the idea, like that's the hope, that like I bring them to an advanced level and then be able to maintain them at a high level.
I think the if your goal is just reach a high level and then maybe drop it, then I think you could you could do that for quite a large number of languages if you're really focused and consistent. But if you say I want to maintain a high level, then I think it starts to get a lot more limited in how many languages it's possible to maintain at a high level at one time.
So I think my goal would be to maintain them at a high level, whatever number. And that's the difficult thing with my master plan, which is basically to like get a couple of languages that I am really interested in, that I feel like are important to me, to to like a strong B2 level, similar to where I got with Spanish, and then spend some time just doing those, bring them to an advanced level, and then maintaining them. But the idea is, it's like, okay, well, how many languages can you do? Because you won't know that until after, like how many you can realistically maintain. And I guess it would be different for every person, time commitments and like and the availability of resources in that language, etc. Because like I've skimmed the internet clean for Swahili resources, and like I've got bookmarks folders with like, I can guarantee you like 80% of all Swahili content that could be available. So like, and I know there's not that many books. Like I found, I think 3 or 4 books that can be usable. So yeah, so that's different things, but I'm not sure. But my goal has always been to like get them to an advanced level.
Cool. Well, just a quick side note. So if anyone's learning Swahili and they want resources, they should hit you up.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. And what other languages are piquing your interest right now?
I don't know. It always changes. Like from the start, it was like completely different to how it is now. So I'm assuming it'll change now. But like my idea was to kind of keep it as like a surprise. Like every single time I learn a new language, my viewers will only know once I release the first diary video for that language.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's a cool idea. So yeah, no pressure. Don't spoil it. So
yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think there were a lot of great takeaways. Just getting to talk to you, you know, like especially the stuff about your mindset and just really focusing on where you're at now and just trying things and see if they work. I think that's a really probably one of the key reasons why you've had so much success in your relatively short language learning career so far. So any other cool, or not really cool, but any other kind of advice that you have for viewers out there who are trying to learn a language?
Well, since you pointed out that that's like something that like maybe other language learners lack, then I would just push that, like just enjoy the journey. Like it's so fun to like see yourself go from knowing nothing and like listening to things and like not understanding anything to slowly see yourself progress. Like just enjoy and appreciate like every word, you know, like every structure that you didn't know. I think like taking time to be like, I didn't understand this at the start and now I listen to it and it's like easy content, and like just to appreciate that like you're growing basically.
Cool. Yeah, totally agree. I think that's awesome advice. Cool. Well, yeah, thanks so much for coming on. And you have your own YouTube channel that you've mentioned a couple times. Like, why don't you go ahead and just plug whatever content you have out there?
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel called Khalifa where I've done Spanish videos, like a video showing that speaking after 3 months and 10 months, so you like can see like how the output kind of changed thanks to the input. And then I have one in Spanish showing how I learned Spanish in much more like detailed way. And then I do diary videos, like that's my main thing. So right now I'm learning Swahili, so I show you guys like how I'm learning it, which resources I'm using, how I'm using them, how I feel in every part of it. I do like comprehension challenges where I watch a native level video at every single point to show you like how much I can understand. And so yeah, I just feel like that's a cool way of showing the progress as well. And so yeah, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, then go check it out.
Yeah, sounds awesome. I'll put the link in the description. So yeah, thanks again so much for coming on. It was great to talk, and maybe we'll do this again in another year or so when you have even more results to talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It was great.